Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the fourth lecture of the webinar this week. And again, we'll be welcoming Professor Jian Kea from the University of Oxford with her lecture with regards to power and solidarity. Please leave any comments, questions, and suggestions at the chat of this Zoom meeting, and I'll be introducing those in later Q&A session, which will be the last 15 minutes of today's lecture. Yeah. Please let me hand over to Professor Jian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you are enjoying nice weather and nice day. So today we are going to think about power and solidarity. Basically, we'll look at some of the 반말 and 존댓말 aspects, and I will introduce some of the interviews and research that I conducted, and as well as some clips which show basically the sort of how age and gender and seniority can play in interpersonal dynamics. So, and also one of the things that if you have more questions and so on, please leave in the chat box. But also we are going to kind of use it in the social media. So if you are able to follow us and leave the question, that will be great, because then later on when we have special talks, a series of lectures, we'll inform you and invite you to the lectures. So anyway, so that's, and you can see my screen okay now? Good.
Yes, we can see, yeah.
Okay, power and solidarity. So yeah, basically, as I said, we'll talk about kind of 반말 and 존댓말, how age and gender, socio-economic status plays a role, and how people understand it, or how people interact, or how people actually, Korean people and non-Korean people understand these dynamics in their day-to-day life. So, as I said in the first lecture, there are many people sometimes dispute whether we have more than 6 and so on, but this is something that Korean linguists agree upon. The 6 styles: formal style, polite style, semi-formal style, familiar style, half-talk or intimate 반말 style, or plain style. But these are 6 styles. So this, the 6 styles that you will be able to find out in the written text or in conversation. But normally in a spontaneous, like natural dialogue conversation, you will normally find out, polite style with you, or sometimes formal style 합니다, sort of, kind of 감사합니다, 미안합니다, kind of more formal style. Or sometimes you can have, between very close people, or when you talk to your junior, you will use intimate half-talk style. Half-talk actually means in Korean 반말, 반 means half, 말 is talk, so half-talk style. So basically, a lot of the time, the choice that you make is between polite style or half-talk style. So it could be quite straightforward, but as we can see, it's not so straightforward. So 반말 and 존댓말, honorific speech style, 반말 half-talk style. As I said, it is something that I call social linguistic competence, which actually Korean even children learn how to use 존댓말 and 반말 well. And sort of this politeness level is something that, as I said before, is ingrained in Korean language, that somehow embodied in our language acquisition overall from very young age. But the problem of 반말, again, like learners of Korean, you're not actually brought up with this 반말 and 존댓말 distinction. It's a little bit can be similar to in other languages, like European languages, the second person pronoun, the 2 distinction, like tu and vous in French. But it's much more complicated because you have to choose in every single proposition, sentence, or your every dialogue, you have to choose one or the other. And what is interesting is, even if you are speaking polite styles, but in a monologue, when you're talking to yourself, you can talk to 반말. So sometimes what I'm trying to say is that, when you talk to someone, you not like have to be consistent from beginning to the end with the same style. Sometimes you can be informal And then when you want to be informal, sometimes you kind of make it almost like your monologue rather than you're talking to the other person, so that you can avoid any misunderstanding. But anyway, this is very dynamic. It's not like something that is fixed by who we are. It could be very much like, dynamic and fluid, and it can change over time. But anyway, so you shift, but the negotiation, as I said, is important. And sometimes if the negotiation is made in the wrong way, it can create tension and conflict, as we'll talk about tomorrow. And this is, like one of the clips that I got from, the variety reality shows in Korean. A lot of times you see like, their interaction, they kind of wonder, okay, should I use to this person who I regard as a friend, 합동, 반말, or 존댓말? So she's Korean and she's interacting with a Korean person, but she's not quite sure, and we are friends. But should I start with the 반말 or 존댓말? And it's another one, another variety show, and they were friends together. But then suddenly he felt a bit offended because he's someone who he thought, the other person thought he's friends, so he started to use 반말, like saying, showing the intimacy. But then suddenly realized, I'm senior to you. Why do you use 반말? So he got a bit sort of surprised. And then, again, there's another variety show and talking about each other relation. They were very perfectly happy to talking to each other, but suddenly he said that you are 2 years younger than me. How could you use 반말? So makes other person quite embarrassing because the other person thought that we are so close. So he's kind of treating him as like his own brother. But then he said, how can you say use 반말 to me? I'm 2 years older. So this kind of, it could be quite humorous and funny in a situation like this variety show. Like the negotiation process could be could be understood as kind of funny gesture, but in a real life it may not be always funny. It could cause people a lot of trouble, and that's what we are going to look at today. So we wanted to understand the driving forces behind the choosing of 반말, and we will look at some of the reactions and people's understanding. So as I said, the speech level, very much complex matters, but the things that you have to think about is the power dynamic, intimacy and solidarity, but also the distance. Do I want to kind of postulate a relationship between myself and the other person very close or not? And then also like, is someone there? Is it private space, in public space, or is something that I can share with the other person? So there's many different layers that you need to think about. And so actually what I did was today I'm going to just share with you about how the native Korean speakers reacted, but also I conducted some other work with non-Korean speakers. But I asked people, what are you feeling, your feelings about the existence of 합동 in the Korean language? And do you feel it's positive or negative? It's a very general question. And I interviewed different age people and different gender. And someone like, 24-year-old student found it very positive. And he said, wherever you go, whomever you meet, if you are the same age or one of you is younger, by using 반말, you can develop a bond of sympathy very quickly. So using 반말, you can be kind of friends like together, and you can build a bondage solidarity quickly. So it's positive. But then the same age, almost same age, another person said, because we have 반말 and 존댓말, in cases where 존댓말 must be used, I feel like there are many times when you can't express your opinion sufficiently or you feel uncomfortable. So it's something always the words that often found is barrier. People said this is a barrier, like, 존댓말, 반말 distinction kind of doesn't make you to express you freely, and that is some kind of barrier. And then another similar age female speaker said, when you use 반말, you can break down the walls and become close. With people with whom you can use 존댓말, no matter how close you say you are, there's always a feeling of barrier there. So when I interview people, the word barrier very often occurred. And again, so some people think it's negative, positive. When you look at this person who is 63-year-old male speaker, when 반말 is used without reservation, not in condescending way, with a close friend or in a trusting subordinate relationship, it creates a feeling of extreme closeness without any mental barriers. So I think it's positive. So this is what he said. But what he said in, like in a trusting subordinate relationship. So I think what he said also reveals the way how thinks about relationship. And yeah, so again, kind of the barrier, is something that creates people barrier, but some people also think that it's a good thing because it shows respect and politeness, and it can create reliable, trusting relationships. So Korean people, what I am trying to say, it has various views, and yeah, it is a mark of intimacy, evidence that you have close friends with someone if you're able to use 반말. Again, a female 60 age 60, and she said 반말 comes off as condescending towards the other person, so it, very against 반말. And so what I kind of, in my research, what I did was I was kind of picking up all the data using sort of social media data or the, like newspaper data, and actually looked up what people's view are about, the half-talk, the 반말. And very interestingly, in the big data and using social media and blogs, what I found was about, 36% of the time positive, but about 50% negative. So it's, it's not like so, everybody has the same opinion, but you can see like, negative connotation was a little bit more than positive connotation about the use of 반말. And in newspaper from 2008 and 2017, I used this in the all Korean newspapers. I kind of tried to find all the instincts where half-talk created some sort of tension and conflict, which we are going to talk about more tomorrow. And as you can see, there are so many conflicts, 102 cases, and very interestingly, when you look at the variety show and the way how people reacted, it was like, feel a bit annoyed. But in real life, and those cases actually ended up with very much like, severe, sometimes violence. But when you look at this kind of the gender ratio, that most of the time among 102 instances, 81 cases were between men and male interaction. So what I'm trying to say, female, when you have only those 3 occasions, they got really upset and they were reported in the newspaper. But most of the cases, male, interaction, and there's any sort of like half-talk conflict that can create a lot of conflict and sometimes violence. So there's clearly a gender effect, and we also found age effect too. So yeah, almost 80% of 반말-related conflict happened between men and aged 40 and older. So very often I can imagine young men, 2 men fighting with each other because of this mistake. But if you're like over 40 and a bit like when you, again, I think about the Parasite, the film. I don't know how many of you watched it, but then Mr. Kim at the end got really upset to the point like, they killed the Mr. Kim. But it shows really like, it creates this is particularly problematic for a certain age group and a bit in male interaction. And so, so in the survey that I conducted 2 years ago with, we had about 200 participants, and what we found was basically, so you can see like workplace and school, and we also did different age group and gender, and what we found was like in the workplace and school, we can see that more conflict workplace without half-talk shift occurred kind of only 29%, whereas half-talk shift occurred in 83% in the sort of school without conflict. So when there's no like conflict between age and age and where there's no rank or social class or so when there's no conflict, people try to make it half-talk. So in a way, if there's no barrier between 2 people, and it's if it's possible, if it doesn't create any, there's all person and younger person, when they work, communicate together, what happens is that the older person very often suggests to sort of half talk shift. Why don't you call me just, why don't you just use 반말, half talk, and so that we can be close. So there's desire to be close to each other. But if there is a sort of conflict, that workplace with the conflict, then people really don't want to use half talk. This is what it shows. So male and female difference, but basically, and there's some more in when you 40 plus older generation. So if there is conflict, people don't want to kind of choose half talk to show their intimacy. What we can see in the later in the clips, and you're like employer-employee relation, and then age conflicts with their rank. Very often you see that they talk to each other in 존댓말 rather than 반말, in order to kind of avoid some kind of conflict. But sometimes also interesting because what we can see later, Mr. Kim and Mr. Park, they were in extreme individual conflict, but they were using 존댓말 to each other. Whereas two women interacting, they also had some sort of issue between each other. But in that case, the younger woman was able to use 반말 to the older woman. So that we will come back. So there's sort of the different age difference, the gender difference, but so simply if there's conflict, people don't want to move to intimate style, even if their relationship grows. Whereas if there's no conflict, then it's a kind of like very easy way to shift into 반말 to show some kind of intimacy. If the 존댓말 continues all the way through, people feel like there's something odd about our relationship because we should be close now. We even know each other for years, but why don't we use 반말 so that we can kind of become good friends? So this is kind of the way how Koreans interpret speech styles. Yeah, this is similar. And the schools, in the school setting with conflict again, if there is a conflict, then you don't move to half talk. Whereas if without conflict, you're most likely to shift into half talk. So kind of what it shows is that there's clear preference for the shift because, as you go on, it's much smoother to have half talk to be more close rather than to be polite to each other. But if there is a kind of in a conflict-free situation, but if there's conflict somehow, age and social status, employment, when the conflicts arise, people avoid any kind of half talk because that will create some tension and people don't want that relationship. So this is what we found in school and workplace in different age and gender group. In a way, I think what we can see is that, communication is a behavior, in human interaction, in human linguistic behaviors, we try to find situations which are comfortable to each other. In some way, if you not really find a comfortable way of speaking to each other, it's very difficult to convey what you feel, what you think. But it becomes a real barrier. So in a way, kind of this negotiation and trying to find the right speech style is a way for Korean people to find the most comfortable spot so that they may be able to efficiently speak to each other. But sometimes, we think, oh, maybe it's all good to not to use any speech style, but to make one speech style. But as I said, it's anyway, although ideally that may be good, just like English, but it's something that we are sort of almost grown up with every single Korean. So it's kind of difficult to really ignore the linguistic convention because language use is also a convention, a promise, social promise. So you can't really say, overnight, I want to become to use the half talk, but you kind of do the negotiation. And that negotiation process is something that you can call a linguistic competence and which you acquire over time. I think nowadays, because you're people watching Korean drama and Korean films and variety shows, I think very much you're used to the way how they negotiate because just like what we look at the 3 clips, people always start their conversation kind of, they spend few minutes at least in any variety shows that popular in Korean TV that you show. A lot of times they do some kind of negotiation and sort of funny interaction, and then later on they kind of settle with one speech style. So it's again, like it's very much kind of reflecting the reality of Korean communication. What we also found interesting about women 40 years of age or older preferred not to shift into half talk when they were speaking to their junior woman in their workplace, even when there was no conflict. This may kind of reflect South Korean women's attitude towards the workplace. So again, like this was one of, one study. I didn't interview, thousands of people, so I only look at 200 people maximum. So, my generalization may be not right. And also, something that, when you interview people, not quite sure whether that really reveals what they, what the way how they interact, or is what they believe, kind of another convention they have in their mind. So you cannot never tell, but at least what we can see is that, women find, compared to men, find workplace kind of really not easy place to communicate with. So maybe there'll be another talk for that, but like workplace is not where women can kind of relax and to be able to freely interact, but it's kind of more like male dominated spaces often that you can very easily switch off and to become informal. So on the whole, speech style, particularly half-talk style, is a very much complex matter. But in a way, this is kind of, more important than even finding the right, it is more important than even finding, how should I, the right word. What I'm trying to say is that, this is more important than, any other mistake. So yeah, this is very important to get the right, to find the right style, to tune it well. Say, okay, so this is, so we are going to watch a few clips now. And actually these clips kind of show the interaction, and then we'll come back what we discussed before. So yeah, this is the clip that we watched before, and this is two-man interaction. I don't know whether you can hear sound. Okay, so sorry, I think the sound, I'll try the sound again. Let me just to share, and then yeah, I think share sound. Let me try again. Okay. Oh, sorry.
정말 죄송합니다, 김 이사님. 애기 엄마 등살에 나도 뭐 이렇게 어쩔 수가 없네. 근데 핵심은 뭐 간단해요. 예, 좀 이따가 제시카 선생님이 그 다송이 생일 케이크 들고서 행진 비슷한 거 할 거예요. 그때 우리가 짜잔 하고 나타나가지고 제시카 쌤을 습격하는 겁니다. 이 인디안 도끼 막 휘두르면서. 예. 그 순간 정의의 인디안 다송이가 짜잔 등장해가지고 도끼로 반겨. 전투 벌어지고. 결국 다송이가 케이크 여신 제시카를 구출. 우와 박수. 뭐 이런 거예요.
Again, we can see these two men interacting, like this employer, young Mr. Park. He uses yo form, polite form, and then half form, which is sort of, he uses polite and formal form together. And the old Mr. Kim say yeah, so yes, but it doesn't stick much. I think it's also very interesting, this, the turn of speech, so that actually, if you are in a particular hierarchical relationship, it doesn't just decide the way how you speak, but the quantity of the speech. So most of the time, the talking is by Mr. Park, And he, when you see Mr. Kim, often the only word he says, yes, okay, fine, yeah. But they use polite style and formal style.
유치하죠. 예.
사모님이 원래 이벤트, 서프라이즈 뭐 이런 거 좋아하시나 봐요.
예, 그런 편이죠.
And he uses he calls his wife like 사모님, and then uses more honorific like she. So kind of he uses honorific and politeness. So I mean, I didn't talk about honorific much this time, but like he kind of shows respect towards his wife, and that's visible in speech. But
예. 근데 이번 생일 더 유난히 신경 쓰네 저 사람이.
애 많이 쓰시네요, 대표님도.
and what he says is that you're really working hard, and it's because you love your wife.
하긴 뭐 어쩝니까, 사랑하시는데.
And then Mr. Park got annoyed by sort of his way of intervening his personal private life. And then you can see like now he's kind of trying to claiming his authority as a boss. And you can see that from verbal and non-verbal aspect.
김 기사님, 어차피 오늘 근무인 거죠 이게?
Saying, it's part of your work, isn't it? Kind of reassuring that this is, your part of your work where I'm your boss.
그냥 뭐 이게 일의 연장이라고 생각하시고, 예?
And he feels Mr. Kim, the driver, feels very sort of humiliated, as you could see.
그러니까. 비 안 왔으면 어쩔 뻔했냐고요.
Yeah, sort of this face, like, very uncomfortable. He kind of acknowledged the situation, but, very much inner conflict. But what we can see, anyway, there's two men, conflict situation, and it's kind of tug of a war within because of this conflict. And, the way how Mr. Park kind of claims kind of authority or trying to resettle the relationship is, this is part of your work, which means that I'm your boss. Please, you should not interfere with my private life. And it's quite interesting because this same, what we watched this yesterday, but Song Kang-ho, the same actor, but now again, the two-man relationship, who are, as you can see, you can kind of figure out, but they are not sort of employer-employee relationship, and the two men interact. You can see that.
진짜 너무하네. 대신 언제 점검 한번 받고 가. 들어올 때 보니까 엔진도 골골하더만.
점검 무슨 점검? 내가 아침 저녁으로 점검하는
So
거야.
they speak to each other. They know each other very well because so they use kind of rough language, but also they don't use polite styles, but use 반말, half-talk.
만 길 탔으니까 또 한가 지났어.
어디 뚝뚝하고 그래?
차 퍼진 다음에 고쳐봐. 돈만 더 잡아먹지.
뭐 그런 재수 없는 소리를 하고 그래. 안 그래도 열받아 죽겠구만. 자, 3,000원만 받아.
아, 이건 한 핀치. 아, 이게 부품값이 얼마인데? 이거 버려?
버리고 왜 버려? 놔두면 다 쓸 데가 있지. 놔둬.
And they even swear to each other, but you can see their relationship very close, a friend relationship. What I don't know whether you're, as non-Korean, whether you could have even noticed the different voice quality. The other time, like very quiet, composed quality in Mr. Kim, Mr. Park. But when you see these two friends, they're very loud and they're very, they use a lot of rising intonation too. Very much like, casual as you are. So in a way, politeness is not like very simply defined by by the use of particular endings or by using some of the linguistic expressions, but it could be expressed in many different ways. And something like this, actually, you can very easily pick up the naturalness and, like kind of some of what we can see less composed, kind of really be almost too rusty or, too rough interaction. But this is possible because that they are friends to each other. So you can see that from their 반말 use, also their kind of very kind of the frequent use of rising intonation and the voice quality, just because simply they are very loud compared to the way how they two men interacted before. Okay, and then maybe you can watch this one.
적으로 뭐가 문제예요?
아니 예를 들면 여기 한 봐요.
라인이 아주 드럽게 접혔죠? 이거 왜 접혀 있는 건데? 이거 왜 튀어나와요? 그럼 접다 만 거잖아요, 지금. 아까 전체 다 보니까 박스 4개 한 개 걸로 이런 상태야. 넷 중 하나는 불량인 거지.
Again, there's two women interacting, and again, there's a conflict where young boss, and the way how she speaks to her, I mean, she's basically complaining about the pizza box, which is not done very well according to her standard. But the way how she uses the intonation itself, shows that her rudeness. In a way, what she said itself is not so rude. I mean, well, there's some problems here and there, but the things which cuts out makes it the conversation more rude is her intonation. The way how she speaks is kind of, and the prosody, the sound quality itself makes it very rude in one sense.
그래서 정말 돈 10% 떼고 주겠다는 거예요, 지금?
불량률에 비하면 페널티 적은 거지, 안 그래요?
And she, because she's so upset, but she cannot simply use 반말. So she has to use polite style. She has to be polite to her. But then the way how she's very upset. So she's almost trying to speak 반말. When probably that will be it. If she uses 반말, that will kind of cut the relationship. So she's kind of at the edge. So she uses your polite style, but if she become more upset, she will switch into 반말, and then their relationship will finish. But it's almost there, and her son comes and rescues her. But
인건비 이거 얼마나 한다고? 너무한 거 아니에요?
there's like it's too you're too mean. And then she could have easily switched at the point to 반말, but she kind of holds it. She's just there, and her son comes. And when her son comes, he starts using polite style to be able to recover the conflict that just arose.
이봐요. 이게 그렇게 간단한 문제가
It's
아니야.
very interesting. She switches between polite style and 반말. She cannot use 반말, and even if here she's boss, it's not so desirable for her to use 반말. But she is using 반말, in a very subtle way to her. Yeah.
이런 불량 박스 하나하나가 얼마나 큰 데미지를 주는지 알아요? 우리 브랜드 이미지에?
박스 접을 사람도 하나 없는 것들이야.
뭐라고?
In the final stage, she kind of got so upset, so she uses 반말. You guys don't even have anybody to work for you to fold your boxes. And then that final stage, she uses 반말, and that time that son comes and rescues her relationship. Otherwise, it will be completely damaged. So, but it's very interesting if you can look at that bit.
박스 접을 사람도 하나 없는 것들이야.
뭐라고?
Yeah. So so what did you say? But finally she uses the 반말, so that's how the relational dynamic breaks. Yeah. But then son comes. Okay, and then these two women we watched yesterday, but okay, again, this is the kind of very much conflicting situation, but this is also in a way could be conflicting situation because of, again, she's younger than this woman, but still, it's not like too conflicting. They're kind of managing their situation.
조사 아들이 이번에 검사 임명됐다면서.
And she said, "Oh, your son just passed the bar exam. Now he uses 반말. So instead of probably even in this situation, like when you think about Mr. Park and Mr. Kim, they were kind of using polite style because Mr. Kim, Mr. Park wants to present himself as a good man, so he uses polite style all the way through, even if when he was mean. But maybe they are more close to each other, so she is able to use 반말 to the older woman who she's employing.
조사 아들이 이번에 검사 임명됐다면서. 대단해.
대단해 without you. So he's great. Money with one hand.
응? 고맙습니다.
And the older woman says thank you, but as you can see, she's nodding, so maybe in her heart she found it again very odd and uncomfortable. So her face, when you kind of compare her face and Mr. Kim's kind of uncomfortable face, somehow they all feel uncomfortable, but still she is kind of following the convention, saying thank you. And then we will look at another final clip, which is kind of interaction between man and woman.
마침 잘 오셨어요.
이거
This is
어떻게 하실 거예요? 마침 잘
This is from the film called Taxi Driver that talks about Gwangju massacre 1980s. But it's just simply to give you some idea, the two, father and mother of two kids who had just fight, so he came to apologize to the child's mother. And it happened to be that he is the tenant of this lady.
오셨어요. 마침 잘 오셨어요.
이거 어떻게 하실 거예요?
아니 남의 집 귀한 장소는 얼굴을 이래 놓으면 대체 어쩌자는 거야.
So he uses, you know that your son, your daughter made hurt my son like this. But he's again like she suddenly without negotiation uses 반말. Like 어떡하자는 거야 without you.
아니 그게 우리 은정이도
아이고 드세다 나 은정이처럼 드센 여자는 처음 봤다니까. 그게 다
Again like 반말, like your daughter is so strong and so wrong.
엄마 없다고 은정 아버지가 너무 오냐오냐
And then he
하니까.
started to say it's because she doesn't have a mother. It kind of started to insult him.
말씀이 좀
내 말 나온 김에 그냥 할게요. 은정이네 사정 뻔히 아니까 내 아무 말 안 하고 있었는데 사글세 밀린 게 10만 원이에요. 10만 원.
And she's saying to him that you haven't paid the rent last month. That's 10만 원, which is now it's 50 pounds. You haven't paid it. So she has the authority as landlady, and like you and your daughter are so bad and wrong, and it's kind of fighting situation. And she's able to shift into half-talk very occasionally, whereas he is constantly using polite forms and saying I'm sorry, but again like he's bowing and so.
상무어머니 제가
아니 넉 달이나 밀렸으면 최소한 언제 주겠다 이런 방구라도 있어야죠. 10만 원이면요 저희한테도 진짜 큰 돈이거든요.
상구 졸리구나. 밥은 많이 먹어서 그래.
So he can't really, interact with her straight, and you can see where he sees his eye gaze. He's not looking at her, but he's looking at the sun.
아유 몰라요. 나 상구 아빠가 뭐라고 해도 이번엔 진짜 안 참아.
Again, like she's saying, I'm not going to tolerate anymore. Again with 반말.
그리고 은정이 야단 좀 치세요. 진짜 이게 뭐야 진짜 내 속상해가지고.
He's bowing. It's really humiliating situation again. Again, I think in terms of age-wise, he's more older and probably they're similar to parents. But the way how, again, we see the personal dynamic, she as a landlady claiming the authority and able to, shift into half-talk and being able to humiliate, whereas he has to use the polite form and has to bow all the time saying, I'm really sorry. It's a daughter. Yeah. So, and then finally, we are going to look at this interaction between the taxi driver and the German journalist. This I recommend the film, but again, this is very interesting. Maybe all these hierarchical elements. I don't know how we can negotiate when we talk with non-Korean person, but we can actually see this is not sort of a kind of another dimension of relations where the two are not really can set any hierarchical relationship. We can't use that method as we apply Korean relation interaction or dynamics, but we can watch this, please. He's saying goodbye, and he considered him as a friend, but also for this taxi driver, it would be difficult to think how to interact with this friend. We saw how he interacts with another friend in a very rough way, but now he's kind of considering him as a friend. but he kind of can't interact like that. Of course, this German journalist doesn't speak Korean, so but he speaks Korean. He doesn't. The other German journalist doesn't understand Korean, but he kind of, they both speak to each other in the way they can speak and express their friendship. And that's the only way, both of them can't understand each other's language, and the way how they can interact is like they give a hug. So this German journalist gives the hug to taxi driver, but the way how he interacts, he doesn't understand the kind of meaning of skinship, and actually the hugging, he did it as a good gesture to kind of assure a friendship. But then taxi driver think, oh, why are you hugging me? So it's again like he, of course, maybe not now anymore, for young generation, hugging is different, but for this taxi driver who hasn't been understood the Western culture very well, like, why are you hugging? So again, like, he uses a non-verbal expression, body language in order to show the friendship, but then taxi driver didn't really understand.
You're a good man. You did a good job.
You good job too. 다음에 한국에 올 땐 한국말
He said,
배워서 와.
when you come to Korea next time, learn Korean. But he kind of expressing his friendship by telling him using the 반말, not polite, but the way how he expresses the friendship is like use 반말 by saying 배워가지고 와. So instead of 오세요, but the way that he chose to use 반말 really shows the way how he's postulating the relationship between the two.
Come back, speak Korean, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the way how they kind of departed. But again, this is a very interesting dynamic when we Koreans interact with non-Koreans. How can we kind of using our metric to be able to set up the relational, right speech styles, right address terms, and so on. Yeah, so this is everything for today. I think in terms of the time, we are we got time for the question and answer.
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Jun, for a wonderful lecture again today. I think we have at least 2 questions. The first one is from Constantina.
Yes. Hello. So my question is that I see, because we saw the statistics that men usually get more offended if they're not, if someone sounds rude. So do you think that men and women receive equal pressure from society to act in a specific way, or men are more pressured and in Korea?
I think that's a really good question, and I think there's a really interesting gender dynamic. I mean, when, for example, the age and status, when they have some conflict, who's woman, like when you think about this 2 women in Hanyo and Parasite, there's a conflict. It's never an easy situation for Korean person to have a young boss, and the conflict between the age and the status. But what we see is that, I show in the newspaper database and social media and interview and everything, basically may find more offenders than the woman. There's 3 cases in the last 10 plus years newspaper when there's some sort of argument between 2 women, 2 celebrities, that because of the wrong choice of speech style. But then I didn't present the data, but what they did was they had an argument, and that was it. They didn't have a physical fight. But when male had that difficulty, very often you end up in the police station or hospitals. Which I find it very interesting. And why men find it more difficult than women, that I do not know the answer, but maybe it's kind of more, their confusion expectation for men to be the head, and that's kind of related to that. So clearly there's, women find, more easy, you can kind of see if even if you're a junior person, of course that's ajumma fighting with the young boss. There's an example like that, but still you don't end up very often in hospital, whereas men, you end up in hospital. It's very funny, like many times, like, severe violence can occur, like maybe while you're drinking or more in the pub. And for Korean people, a lot of time, particularly with the interaction with strangers, you don't know me, but how dare you speak to me in 반말? That's one of the top reasons that people could have a fight. And so I think that, and maybe we need more study, but it seems to be well, as we can find, it's very there's clear gender difference, that women find less pressure, whereas men, and very often like male interaction is kind of not easy option. Like if you have sort of Mr. Kim, Mr. Park situation, of course Mr. Kim and Mr. Park speaks, but in the entire film, they're more like they want to talk about their business and work. They cannot really imagine that Mr. Kim and Mr. Park didn't meet at his workplace, but outside, like going for a walk, and they bump into each other. And it's very difficult for you to imagine how they interact, whether they will understand it's a continuation of work, which Mr. Park said repeatedly, this is part of your work, in order to be able to find the right relationship. Or you can just really, leave everything out, and then, outside you could be friendly to each other. But you can't just to say, well, okay, I met you in the parks, therefore I don't have to behave like your employee. That is we can imagine, but doesn't happen normally. Like you carry the baggage throughout. So as a result, very often it's difficult for you to find people interacting socially outside their workplace. Of course, if you're in the same rank, your friends, but I think it's quite difficult for you to work, to have a coffee or to have a chat, natural chat with your boss who has some sort of conflict, in a way, age, rank conflict. So so I think that's very interesting sort of aspect in terms of when it comes to male interaction.
Thank you. 감사합니다.
I think we have just one more. I think it's more about the opinion as well as question, if I understand correctly. So Nancy, could you speak out to all of us? I mean, with your view, yeah.
안녕하세요. Like Sumanchi just said, this is more of a opinion, or just a point of discussion, more than a question, because I'm an Indian, and just based on my understanding as an Asian, I wanted to put it as an Asian, not an Indian, because I've lived in Vietnam, I've lived in Malaysia, Singapore, and having watched Korean dramas and movies for a couple of years now, is just based on my understanding that, coming from an Indian society, I understand how heavily patriarchal, you can see how heavily patriarchal Korean society is. And based on your previous discussions, when we were talking about Neo-Confucianism and Confucianism, and how during the different eras, men were the ones who were dominating and setting out rules and ideologies of how women should be or how women should behave. So it's that the men have the dominance over women in general and in society as such. So I know I see a lot of Korean women in the group as well. So just to get an understanding of if my idea of the point of discussion that I put out is right, please correct me if I'm wrong, but just to understand. But I feel, which is why when you explain that men have more conflicts in terms of when they based on their tone of discussion as compared to women. So yeah, this was just like an opinion, not a question as such. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. Actually, I mean, it's could be very interesting to know, like, Korea, Japan, and China are sort of more Confucian.
Jack, 내리와. Jack.
You're on mute. Sorry.
교수님 소리 틀어주십시오. 죄송합니다. 예.
So yeah, I think it's kind of it's really interesting whether this sort of it's quite difficult to generalize this Asian thing or Western European culture, but it's also quite true. And I've done the work over the last 2 years about looking over different Asian languages in order to kind of figure out the non-verbal aspects. And what I found is like East Asia, also Southeast Asia, kind of a lot of things are very, very similar. It's difficult to pin down religious religious reasons because their Confucianism is not so prevalent in the rest part of the world, but it's like sort of the way, for example, like second person pronoun, the kinship term, respect, intimacy, or the use of the calling someone auntie in your family. So kind of there's so many things are there, and at the same time the flexibility in terms of structures and the linguistic representation. So kind of Western European understanding and the kind of a lot of the other sort of trans-Eurasian languages kind of share a lot of these aspects, I think. And also something kind of gender-wise, I mean, it's very difficult to understand pinpoint what is the main cause, but this is clearly like what we show the data example, like why is that same situation male may have more confident than the other and there seems to be quite general population across Asia or Southeast Asia or East Asia. So very interesting, what is the factor that influence such behaviors, linguistic and cultural behaviors. But I can only speak to you from Korean side that I looked at quite closely. That is, yeah, said like conflict then with male over 40. Very often you can end up hospital, whereas women have problems that you can forget about it and carry on and you can make up, but not so easy for male interaction.
감사합니다.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Another question.
I think so. Yeah. So I think so. Yuntian Sensei also shared his experience, but I think he's not allowed to speak out. I mean, as he's in the library, and so I think that's everything for today. So thank you very much for Professor Jin's speech and all of you participants' attendance and interaction today. And we have the real final closing lecture tomorrow, and it'll be about conflict, tension, and humor. And so please enjoy sunny Thursday and see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
안녕히 계세요.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.
안녕히 계세요.
감사합니다.